At a May 9, 2012 hearing by the Senate Judiciary Committee on the oversight of the Office of the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator, Senators Patrick Leahy and Christopher Coons were among those expressing concerns about counterfeit drugs. Senator Leahy began with a reference to a case involving the weight loss drug Ally, one of the few recent federal prosecutions for counterfeits that do not involve erectile dysfunction drugs. Later, in an exchange with Senator Coons, Victoria Espinel mentioned that the United States Department of State is now devoting 1/3 of its training budget for education relating to counterfeit drugs.
Last year, the Justice Department secured the conviction of a Chinese national, a man who sold counterfeit versions of the weight loss drug Ali through a website based in the United States. Now, there's one thing selling these, but in this case, this counterfeit version caused at least one victim to have a stroke because the website was based in the United States, but could do something about it. Law enforcement could move in. The defendant was sentenced to 7 years in prison, and the website was shut down. Now, that's a good result. I think you and I are both concerned about those people who evade the law because their domain names are registered overseas. In fact, somebody could look for that same weight loss, going on a website, find one that looks very accurate, takes regular credit cards from here, but it's operating outside the U.S., so it falls into a loophole. And the danger to the health of Americans is still the same. Will you continue not only to work with Congress, but with a lot of the parties involved to try to address this problem? And it's not just weight loss things, it's heart medication, it's somebody on a fixed income looking at a way to save money and find what looks like a legitimate website, and they buy the medication, and then they end up either very ill or even dying as a result of it.
Absolutely. So clearly for sites that are based overseas, our law enforcement jurisdiction is limited. There are a few things that we can do and that we are doing. One of those is to press foreign law enforcement to do more, and we're doing that in a variety of ways, including trying to ensure that we have more U.S. personnel on the ground to build relationships with law enforcement overseas, and using very high-level diplomatic pressure to encourage countries to do more. But we know realistically that there are certain countries where it's going to be very difficult to have robust law enforcement cooperation for many, many years. So we will continue to press on that, but we are aware of the limitations of that as well. We believe that the private sector can do a lot to help us here. When the U.S. companies are interacting with sites that are based overseas, if they will work cooperatively with us to try to not be engaging with those sites and not lending their legitimate services to those sites, we think that can go a long way in helping address the problem. But it is a very, very serious problem, and we would, of course, want to work very closely with you, Mr. Chairman, and with this committee as a whole on how to address it.
Question, you opened by referencing the President's comments in State of the Union about the importance of protecting IP, and he cited pirated movies, music, and software, which are a very large part of our IP-intensive exports. But I'm also, just to echo the Chairman's first question, concerned about pharmaceuticals. You've had great success working in voluntary collaboration with a lot of private sector partners in shutting down websites and in strengthening our protections against counterfeit drugs. I think it's important for the average American to realize that that's a vital part of what we're talking about here, is keeping our pharmaceutical supply safe and free of the very widespread counterfeiting that is occurring in other parts of the world, where it can be as much as 20 or 30% of the drug supply, particularly in the developing world. What next steps do you expect? What more resources might your office need to be more successful in this ongoing fight against counterfeiting and drugs in particular?
With respect to our overall efforts, the President also said in the State of the Union that there would be more inspections at our border to keep out counterfeit and unsafe products, and counterfeit drugs will be a big focus of that. There are other things that we are doing as well. Part of that is working with foreign law enforcement. Counterfeit pharmaceuticals is actually an area where we've had pretty good cooperation with foreign law enforcement, and there have been, there was recently an enormous sort of global coordinated sweep focused on counterfeit drugs, which 81 countries participated in. So there has been good movement, I think, in terms of foreign law enforcement cooperation on counterfeit drugs. Which is not to say we don't still have a problem, but that is an area where there's been more receptivity. I think the voluntary efforts that you refer to are absolutely critical. I think there's a big education gap here. I think consumers are unaware of some of the dangers that they're facing when they're buying from sites that are not pharmacies in any sense, that are criminal enterprises, that are masquerading as pharmacies. So I think that there is more that we can do and will be doing in terms of consumer education. And in terms of capacity building, the State Department is now putting a third of all of its training funds towards counterfeit drugs, which is a demonstration of the importance they place on it. And I should say that in this regard, Undersecretary Robert Hormats has been a tremendous ally here. Counterfeit drugs is something he is very concerned about, and he has been putting his energy and the resources of the State Department behind that.
You know, unfortunately, organized crime used to think they could just do small scams or protection rackets and all. Now it's a lot easier to do much, much bigger ones through these.